So a few days ago, the finale to House of the Dragon Season 2 has wrapped up. Today, I'm going to be talking full spoilers for this season. So let's get into it. This was, of course, a very anticipated season of television by many people around the world, including myself. This had a 2-year turnaround time from the pretty great season 1. While I do admit that nothing in House of the Dragon has come close to Game of Thrones at its peak, it is still a really great show to watch, filled with top tier production value. You can see the money that is being spent on each episode on the screen, just from the authenticity of the production design and the costumes really immersing you into this world of Westeros. There's also a lot more of a use of visual effects in House of the Dragon because we have all of these dragons flying around doing things. Season 1 was a little bit clunky with some issues with these massive time jumps, but overall it was a great season that left a lot to be excited about for Season 2. And while I do think Season 2 is a pretty good season of television as a whole, it is still quite disappointing from what I expected from this season. And some of my issues with this are quite universal. I do think that there is a lot of nothing happening in way too many of these episodes for a season that has only 8 episodes and has a 2-year turnaround time. Now, I love Game of Thrones, and I especially loved the earlier seasons of Game of Thrones, so I don't want to hear, because there's no battles, it doesn't mean nothing's happening. Similar thing with Game of Thrones, but the difference with Game of Thrones was, while there were long stretches of characters just walking from one location to another, it would completely change your perspective of a character. The character work was infinitely better than what House of the Dragon has currently been, even though I do not mind what House of the Dragon has done. There hasn't been some crazy flip. There hasn't been anything like that has really completely changed your perspective on who these characters are and their motivations. For me, a lot of how these characters felt in Season 1 is fairly similar to how they feel in Season 2, with a couple of exceptions. I'm going to break this review down now by just following the key characters in this journey. And we're going to start off with House Black, because I do think that was where a lot of the disappointment was lying, because to me, they were the most interesting aspect of the show in Season 1. Especially Damon Targaryen, played by Matt Smith, who continues to be excellent in this role, but what he is given here in this season is frankly quite disappointing as a whole, as he just ships off to Harrenhal after having a conflict with Rhaenyra after the first episode. It really felt like they went almost nowhere with this, and there was one scene at the end of this season that gave you so much forward momentum, and I really wish we had gotten a little bit more of that throughout the season. It felt like we're just seeing these sequences of him trip balls and him being like, what's going on? And it's like, come on, man, figure it out already. And a lot of what is happening there just kind of felt so repetitive that it felt really pointless in a lot of moments in this show, and took away from some of the greatness of these episodes, because after this kind of gimmick wore off, it got kind of repetitive and boring and tedious really fast, which is a shame, because Damon in Season 1 was my favorite character of this show, and I love the performance from Matt Smith, and I just felt like it was kind of wasted here. Now, I'm not someone who has read this book, and I don't want to, not until I have finished watching the show first, but I'm sure that these sequences were written a lot better in book form than what they are in this show. And from what I hear, they made quite a few departures from the book in this season, especially with what happens at the end, which is kind of funny because I think what happens at the end of Damon's arc was the most interesting moment of his arc, with him pretty much swearing loyalty to Rhaenyra. I still kind of don't trust the guy. I still think he has ulterior motives, and this season was trying to really go through the complexity of these emotions for this character, but it does it in just such an unsatisfying way. Even if I can see the vision that is being had in these episodes for this character, it just doesn't do it for me. And then it hits you with this big member berries thing of a lot of things that Game of Thrones brought. And I felt great in those moments because I love Daenerys, right? And just seeing that little silhouette was really, really cool. And seeing the White Walker and what that may hint at for the future of Damon and this character was very, very interesting to me. And I do like when Game of Thrones and House of the Dragon kind of peer into the future a little bit and give you a little bit of a tease as to what's to come. I do like the way they do it. It does feel organic within the narrative and doesn't feel forced at all. So I don't mind it here, and I did find it interesting in the way that it completely shifts this character's motivations, or as it seems. Then you have Rhaenyra, who I, once again, think is a pretty great character and is played superbly by Emma Darcy in both these seasons. I think this character does have some interesting things, especially with the way that she's treated by a lot of her followers, where they don't really give her the respect that she deserves, even though she is the rightful ruler of Westeros. I really, really love that aspect of this character and her trying to fight through that adversity. And maybe I want some more Daenerys from this character, because she also was a character that went through a lot of these struggles, but she was able to prove to so many people why she deserves to be followed, because she was so compelling and such a badass that she would force people's hand at some moments and was a somewhat ruthless leader at points, although she does have that tinge of kindness that makes her a really great character to follow. Rhaenyra is a little bit different, where she knows that she's the rightful heir to this throne, that she deserves that, and she's constantly being held back, and she kind of folds under that a little bit at moments. And it felt like some of this season was her trying to push through that and just go with whatever strategy she has in place anyway, which she does with trying to find these different dragon riders. And I did find those aspects to be fairly compelling. And I do think as a whole, Rhaenyra was a much more interesting character to follow this season than Damon was, 100%. Now, there were some controversial aspects of this season, which we have people, you got to get over some of this stuff. I mean, there was a kiss that happened, and that is clearly the lowest rated episode on IMDb because it's two girls kissing, right? And to me, it was a whatever scene. The episode as a whole was kind of boring, which did make it one of the weaker episodes. But it's seeing that was not something that just completely turned me off the show or anything like that. It is what it is, and it does lead to some interesting dynamics in the future with Damon. So I do think there is some purpose there with her kind of cheating on her husband and, you know, him having these kind of ulterior motives and doubts about Rhaenyra and his own goals of trying to take this throne. That may be a moment that really comes back to bite Rhaenyra in the future. So don't think that it was just a complete waste of a scene or anything like that. I do think there is perhaps some purpose there. We get a really brilliant scene at the end of this season with her and Alicent. And seeing these two characters talk to each other on screen for the brief moments that they do in this season, I thought was such compelling television and such technically brilliant acting. Both Emma Darcy and Olivia Cooke deserve so much credit for the performances that they give in this season and the first season, because you can tell there's just so much history between these characters. And for the entirety of this show, these two characters haven't entirely been played by the same person. So to carry that forth is really brilliant acting. And once again, some of the decisions that were made leave me with a lot of questions that I'm interested to see the payoff for in season 3 and beyond. Now let's get to the more positive stuff and the stuff that I really loved about this show, which surprisingly on my end was all the stuff with House Green, who to me were the more uninteresting side in the first season. But now, oh my god, I love a lot of these characters and what they're doing. There's so much scheming and a lot of that brilliant strategy that you see in the best of Game of Thrones, especially from the Lannisters or something like that. there is that real great hint of just absolute villainy with some of these characters, and you're just waiting for them to go over the edge, and to see these strange strains and fractures in these relationships was compelling television. And I think a lot of that surrounds Aemon Targaryen, who I think was brilliant and my favorite character this season. He had so much that he wanted to claim. He's obviously pissed off that Aegon was given the throne over him, which is something he thinks he rightfully deserves. And seeing that culminate in episode 4 with that incredible battle, and was easily the best episode of this season, to see Aemon fly directly at Aegon on Vhagar and blast the shit out of him. Loved it. I think that was just such a great Game of Thrones epic betrayal that was paid off so well. It had a great build up. I loved it. And to see kind of what Aemon is strategizing as he gets more and more desperate and is just becoming really brutal and descending into villainy. Absolutely love that stuff. On the flip side, I really loved Aegon as well. I mean, he has always been this kind of petulant child, and when he's on the throne, it seems like at first that they're trying to make him like another Joffrey, just this spoiled brat who everyone wants to see get killed, but he does have some hints of sympathy to him. You know, he's acting out in a lot of these earlier seasons of the season, but you understand why his kid gets murdered, and you see him in a quiet moment crying to himself as Alicent consoles with him. He is acting out because he is going through grief, and that gives you a touch more to sympathize with than what Joffrey has ever given us. And I really loved what they did with that in making him a somewhat complex character. And that is where I feel a lot of that great early season of Game of Thrones stuff, where you just have this really long build up throughout the season and just little moments here and there, and eventually it completely 180s your perspective of a character. You know, it felt like Aegon was going to be someone that you love to hate. And when you see him get burnt and you see him be unable to get up and walk, and half of his face has been burnt, and all the pain he's going through, you can't help but feel a little bit of pity for the guy and what he is going through, as his brother has just betrayed him and plans to kill him at the first chance that he possibly can. Seeing him so frail and vulnerable makes you feel something for that character, and that is something that Game of Thrones has been excellent at pulling off. I think Theon Greyjoy was always the pinnacle of that, right? At first, you didn't mind the guy, then he became someone you really hated, and you wanted to see him get murdered in such brutal fashion. Then he goes through everything he does, becoming weak and just being tortured and maimed constantly, and you just want him to get out of that. You're like, okay, he's been through enough. You feel sympathy for him, and I felt like that's what they were trying to do a little bit for Aegon, and I liked that. And I think that was brilliant writing and just great subtle storytelling as a whole. Then lastly, you have Alicent, who I think is once again a pretty great character. Not my favorite in this show, but one that I don't mind following episode to episode, because yes, she has had her fair share of betraying Rhaenyra and that side of things, but she has a strong set of beliefs and ultimately isn't a terrible person. She does want peace for the realm and just wants to enjoy the spoils of being a royal. She may be foolish and things like that, but I do think as a character, she is quite good-hearted, and this season, you see her slowly try to repent for a lot of the things that she did in season 1. Once again, great layered writing, great layered storytelling that I love in this season. And I think Olivia Cooke is a phenomenal actress who manages to pull off a lot of the more complex scenes for this character, where she has to show a lot of emotional resonance in these scenes. And that final moment with Rhaenyra was one of those brilliant scenes as you really question, okay, she has made this decision where she will side with Rhaenyra, even if that means they have to kill Aegon, her son. And when all of this went down, the first thing I could think of was, oh shit, do not go back to King's Landing, because one way or another, someone is going to find out, and Aemond or someone is just going to kill her, and she is in for a real brutal death. And that makes me kind of fearful for the character, because she is on this path of redemption, even if that means that she's seen in history as a villain. Look, week to week, I was quite excited for this show. Every single episode that appeared, even if we got a slower episode one week and a better episode the next, it did feel like a lot of episodes were slower and not necessarily giving me as much as I would like. And some people call that filler. I kind of hate that word in television, because we have not seen this story play out. Once you see this story played out, all of the arcs have been completely just finished, then we can look back and see what's filler and what's not. Like, some episodes are trying to give you more context for a character. They're trying to slowly build a narrative. Game of Thrones has always been like that. It was never about giant, massive battles, but there was layered storytelling that kept you captivated week to week. And yes, I do think some people have been a little bit too impatient with this season, but then again, there were moments where I was like, come on, it just does not feel like anything as compelling as what Game of Thrones was doing. And even though we want these big epic moments and we're not quite getting them, I do want to see more, because it still does lend itself to having some of those moments. Episode 4 was a key example for that, right? There was just so much payoff in that episode. It felt like a season finale on its own. And that might have been an issue, as it was trying to build up again after this big climactic battle. Episode 8, the season finale, did feel a little bit disappointing, because it just felt like all of this build up to the next season, which does hurt a little bit because of the 2-year gap between seasons. If this was coming out next year, maybe I wouldn't have minded so much, but it's like, I have to sit with this for 2 years. That's a long time, man. A lot can happen in that time, and it is a tad disappointing that we didn't get at least a little bit more from that finale. And that is a little bit strange, because I actually quite liked the episode on its own. I think it had a lot of forward momentum and gave me a lot of progression that I like to see. Yes, it didn't end in a big climactic battle, but it was exactly what I was referring to when I talk about some of the more compelling elements of Game of Thrones, where it wasn't always the battles. There were just compelling moments. You were so invested in the writing of the show that someone changing their motivations or some kind of turn in these characters was what made it interesting. Seeing a new development in the strategies that were taking place, this chess match between the houses. I love that about Game of Thrones. And House of the Dragon tries to do that at moments and hasn't been anywhere near as compelling to me. But that episode, I fucked with it, and I really, really liked what it was doing with that. As I said, it is a little bit disappointing that that was the season finale, but hey, we did get some forward momentum with these characters, some new developments happening that I'm really excited for. Then there are things that I just don't think were very interesting at all. There's just particular characters that have not gripped me once in both seasons of House of the Dragon. The first is Lord Corlys, especially this season. I mean, everything that was happening with him and his crew, it was just such a drag. I mean, all it was them building a boat. And it's like, okay, it's going to lead to them going out to sea and giving some support to Rhaenyra and her armies on the water. Okay, cool. I know where that is going. And what they were giving me in these scenes, it just felt like it was taking away from a lot of the more interesting moments of the show. That and Damon at Harrenhal were just such blights on the pacing of each episode that I just could not care less. I hope that there is more payoff to the Lord Corlys one in particular, because Damon's one, I started to see potential in that final episode. Lord Corlys, I'm still not quite there yet. I need to see more. And here's hoping, right? I really do want to see more because, Lord Corlys and his crew, I can feel the potential of some really great moments, but it's just not giving it to me at this stage. And I think Rhaenys was one of the characters that was linked to him that made it a little bit more interesting, but with her obviously dying in that episode where that big battle happens, it just takes a lot of the wind out of the sails, pun intended, for these characters. I haven't even talked about Paul Atreides, Lord Jarrus yet, because, I mean, he's fine, right? And I do think he also has potential, but I haven't seen too much yet other than him pouting and disagreeing with a lot of Rhaenyra's decisions. Okay, I want to see more. I think that there is a lot to be desired there, and I do think the potential is definitely there where he's going to have some kind of outburst. He's really going to show some side of ruthlessness or foolishness that may get House Black into trouble, and that is a bomb that I cannot wait to see go off. Overall, I do think House of the Dragon Season 2 is a solid season of television. I think it's fine enough. I don't think it's offensively bad or anything like that, and I think some people need to chill out a little bit. Once again, the story has not fully finished yet. These things that are being set in motion in Season 2 might be a lot more compelling by the time we hit the finale. I will hold out judgment until then, but yes, I will agree that watching this just as is, not knowing what's going to happen in the future, I did want a little bit more from this season. I did find some moments to be really uninteresting, and that is a shame because there is so much good here as well that makes me watch week to week, that has me excited for more, because there is a lot to love here, especially with House Green. I think we need to keep following in that direction because I absolutely love that stuff, and it really takes me back to when Game of Thrones was in its heyday. And I think if we just keep building off that, as well as lifting up a lot of what happened in House Black to what it was in Season 1, we are in for a massive treat in the future. And I do think we're going to get that. I am really hopeful. It feels like, okay, we've got the vegetables out of the way. Let's get into the steak. Let's get into the good stuff. And that is all I'm hoping for. And that is kind of what I think we're going to get. So, as a score, I'm going to give House of the Dragon Season 2 a 3.5 out of 5. I think it's a slight step down from Season 1, but it hasn't fallen off a cliff. I think there was plenty to love and some things that needed some more development. And those are my thoughts towards House of the Dragon Season 2. Let me know what you think about this season in the comments below. Do you love it or do you hate it? I love to hear your thoughts and why that is. I'd love to have a nice conversation about this season in the comments below. Hope you're all doing well. Remember to like and subscribe, and if you love my content, please consider joining and becoming a member, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.